I could just read out some of the history of this album and the Sex Pistols in general. I won't. Instead, I will share my own history with the Sex Pistols and this iconic album. Firstly, some newer Simpsons episode, 21st Century, later 2000s, they did Sid and Nancy, Nelson and Lisa respectively. It was like an anthology sort of episode, you know. They substituted their habit for hard drugs with a love of confectionery chocolates. I went to Wikipedia to read about the new episode I saw, as I did, and learned that it was a send-off of a band, apparently an iconic and important band, known as the Sex Pistols. I figured, how important can they be? I've never heard of them, and with a stupid, edgy name like that, I would have been like late primary school at this time, you see. Why do people think that is cool or worth referencing? If it is so important, how come it was never referenced in The Simpsons before, for example? The reason I'd never heard of it, well, one's parents aren't in a rush to tell you about the Sex Pistols, and my parents, though aware of them, were not necessarily major fans. My mother later told me she was taken to a Sydney Pill, Public Image Limited, gig by some work friends, though it wasn't her thing at all. And so then, one day, I was in my Year 8 music class for the first time, some posters on the wall. One was a Dark Side of the Moon, was kind of familiar with that image, most people are. That iconic Andy Warhol banana for the Velvet Underground album. I may have seen that before, but when I would see that image later, I would think of, before familiarizing myself with that album, that particular music class. And then what seemed like a promo poster, not thinking it was an album cover. Never mind the Bollocks, here's the Sex Pistols. I thought Bollocks meant damn it at one time, but it is closer perhaps to bullshit. So never mind the bullshit, here's the Sex Pistols. This is really where it is at. This is really honest. This is really true. No phonies, no dress-ups, no celebrities, just raw working English class id. And then learning later that wasn't just a promo poster, for a gig or for a bedroom wall. That was the actual album cover. What an audacious statement. Later I had a cousin who went to another high school, and then a classmate corresponding with them actually, who both got into the Sex Pistols. Now, at the time, it seemed like they were into the image and appearing edgy and shocking, so that others would have a certain impression of them. That seemed more important to them than the music. I still stand by that. It was the social media era. That's all every teenager was thinking about. If I do this, people will think that of me. If I do that, people will think this of me. So I dismissed the Pistols' music for like a year and a bit. Them and other friends, rough and tumble, rugged and fun, these guys were really punk rock. They lived it, that's why they found the music so captivating. It represented their feeling and disdain for authority figures. Said friends were at a stricter Catholic school than mine. Mine was at a Diet Catholic high school. Theirs was a De La Salle, no-joke, old Catholic money fortress. And so their attitudes drew them to punk rock, not social media clout. And then listening to the music, encouraged by people who really got it, and also liked other forms of music so sincerely and articulately, I got this album. But how and why? It perplexes me why this is good. I mean, why is anything good? Well, I like to think I explained why so or not in other reviews I have uploaded here in this series. With this, it is difficult to initially ascertain. Firstly, it is not the raw production. This isn't really a raw production. It is an elaborate, multi-layered and considered production. Chris Smith's work, a consummate, lauded professional producer, designed to sound evil, dark, murky and rough. Not unlike John Cale's glorious work on that first Stooges album, the self-titled release. If you want raw pistols, try the Spunk bootleg, now an official compilation. Pretty good stuff, actually. Okay, so, the production, raw or not, raw or pseudo-war, is a brilliant, powerful, crushing punch. One of the great accomplishments of 70s production, from a technical standpoint, disguising its professionalism to the average listener is kind of genius, certainly inspired and wholly unorthodox. Then we have another explanation, one proposed and championed by the deep cut fans. Glenn Matlock is secretly a genius of pop songwriting, responsible for all of the Pistols songs except two, one being Bodies, the other Holiday in the Sun. Holiday in the Sun is all of the other songs on the album's riffs in one tune, hidden away as original on the opening track, and it also has the most actual production polish, the jackboots and whatnot. Bodies is, well, Bodies. A wannabe Ramones song, but better than those lazy, low energy, by comparison at least. And to the Saints as well, while we're at it. Ramones are so influential, but their music was cynical, uninspired, but inspiring garbage. Let's be totally honest, rock and roll pre-psych is so damn overrated. And pre-Stooges if we're trying to appeal to punks, and I do appreciate the gutter honesty of punk. One can't be corrupted if you just stay in the gutter. Bodies is such a splooge of Ramones wannabe bursting energy. It just comes out as stream of consciousness Sid Vicious, excited to be in a basic amateur garage rock band, enthusiastic anger. Sid Vicious only had that one song in him, pretty much. Bodies is indicative of all of his musical abilities, and that's maybe okay. Sid Vicious was a joke, and the fans who idolised Vicious were about image. Lydon's lyrics and persona really stole the show. Inspired by glam TV appearances and their hypnotic, subversive swaggers, Lydon/Rotten was the real reason why the Pistols worked. Even if Glenn Matlock really was a genius capable of such exciting, catchy, and iconic riffs, he couldn't have composed lyrics and vocals to match. Lydon, or at least his delivery, the lyrical credits are often disputed, sells all of this music, the entire recording/socio-cultural project, seemingly effortlessly. So, Steve Jones played on the album, sounds like he could have been anybody else on Spunk, could have been. He learnt Matlock's riffs, the guitars were touched up with Chris Thomas's genius production, the original engineer of the Beatles, Helter Skelter, I believe, and Steve Jones has behaved the least punk of any Pistol. I sincerely believe that based upon everyone's actions afterward, Matlock wrote the music, drummer Paul Cook has made this claim before, Jones recorded the guitar and bass, as Vicious, Matlock's replacement, obviously could not play, and Matlock, after being removed from the band, fired or quitting, it doesn't necessarily matter, had his involvement downplayed as much as possible. According to everyone involved, Matlock and Lydon were in conflict during the lead-up to their splitting, and so I suspect Lydon, who Matlock claims wasn't acting very punk, rather the contrary, was trying to take credit for everything, including songs which he knew were Matlock's, and was embracing his celebrity status, like a glam superstar perhaps, a bit too jovially. And so at Lydon's insistence, and his word would hold great sway in that world of course, Matlock was out, or he claims he quit. Either or, really. I think what happened was lightning in a bottle. It was Matlock composing the music he was best at, and then he probably chose to deliberately never explore that kind of rock/pop/punk songwriting ever again, as it had too many negative associations for him, and he didn't want to be pigeonholed, especially not with music he was barely credited with writing anyway, even if he had. The tracklist is so memorable. Let's examine. Holidays in the Sun is great, no one can deny that. Just a fun, riveting intro, totally indicative of the overall album. Bodies is so fun and stupid, such an odd creative emphasis to mold a song around. I don't even mean the morbid, shocking lyrics, just the composition itself as a structure, but then it was probably based around the words, and so winds up with such an odd, kind of architecture. Bodies, I'm not an animal. Bodies, I'm not an animal. It perplexed me. How can this uber-iconic album, one of the most revered works of late 20th century art in some quarters, have this as its second track? Very significant moment on this album. The second impression one gets from one of the most iconic works of 20th century art is Bodies. And no one talks about it. It was like a really weird, obvious, mutated elephant stumbling around the room, everyone seemingly not noticing. How come this silly song, which if me and my friends wrote it, everyone would hate it and tell us to off ourselves, especially fans of the Sex Pistols actually, is liked by prestigious proper music critics? Because it's a pretty good song, though it shouldn't be. My friends and I, the aforementioned, used to enjoy singing along to that song. We also would wonder why more people didn't talk about it, almost pretend it doesn't exist. I guess it busts open the myth of Sid Vicious being a lost, dead before his prime sort of genius a little bit. Oh well, moving on. No Feelings is classic, excellent punk songwriting. If it popped up tomorrow, I'd say it was worthy of Nevermind the Bollocks. Liar is a pastiche of the Pistols/Matlock songwriting in this era, but pretty good tune. God Save the Queen writes itself. As an instrumental, it is a fairly basic, fast-paced Black Sabbath wannabeing, but quite good. Lyrically, it really comes together, as Lydon's proud anthem here. Problems is pretty awesome, but more similar to the superior Pretty Vacant than we'll care to admit sometimes. 17 is one of the more iconic and well-written hooligan-esque tracks on here. I'm a lazy sod, just classic. Anarchy in the UK is well written, probably a homage to Black Sabbath, the heaviest, scariest band around at that time. Imagine this is just an instrumental. Heavy, prominent bass. Oh, did Jones write this? No, Matlock, clearly. Several varied riffs, but with a Beatles-esque chorus ting. I wanna be anarchy. Matlock allegedly disdained for liking the Beatles. Maybe he wrote that song. Submission is genius. Almost too good for these guys. Maybe McLaren wrote it for Matlock, but McLaren can't be that much of a genius and then disappear to never write anything like that again. But Matlock could. He had reason to. Unlike McLaren, he didn't make a fortune of the Pistols' name or music, so he didn't want anything to do with it again. Perhaps resentful, Pretty Vacant, the other most impressive composition on the album. This is how you learn to get the Sex Pistols, what they're all about, why people like them, what was their sound philosophy, what were they ultimately serious about, if anything, and were they more than just cheap, superficial shock value, really? Yes, try Pretty Vacant. It illustrates the unique songwriting priorities of the Sex Pistols and punk rock in general at this budding formative time. The Ramones never came close to writing a song as original or good and creative within their same field as Pretty Vacant. They're so overrated. 2 good albums and a bunch of utter nonsense. Let's be totally honest. New York is pretty good. A bit samey. Maybe they just needed more tracks for live gigs. It could happen, of course. And then E.M.I. Yeah, most songs on this album are kind of similar and derivative to, well, each other, but it is amazing that this iconic British album ends itself with a jab at the major record label E.M.I. E.M.I. afterward probably just shrug it off, laugh and pretend that they are self-aware. Yeah, we are E.M.I, but we can change from being monopolizing hacks if we learn to embrace the Sex Pistols eventually too. The mainstream appropriation embrace of the Sex Pistols was to mask and sanitize the criticisms it had of the establishment. They thought, hey, if we can embrace the Sex Pistols as well, society and everything will all be okay. But they just wanted to superficially come across as having taste and smother the last time, perhaps in UK history, certainly maybe a pop-based phenomenon was so popular and unignorable, and decrying the gatekeeping establishment, thugs as powerless and insignificant compared to what the people truly wanted. And more importantly, the Sex Pistols embraced what was considered the lowest common denominator, whilst offering a more sincere vision of what the upper classes claimed could never be taught or gifted to their lower classes at all. Knowledge, awareness, education, culture, and critiques of society. The Sex Pistols and UK punk offered class fusion, absolute merging and amalgamation. The aware and astute social critics of the upper class were now being embodied by those who most had grievances to share, the working classes. The demand for change, the acknowledgement of discontent, culturally was not solely, nor even ought to have been, the product of the upper classes, but from the lower working classes. Rather than being consigned to misery or boastful pride and enforced idiocy or simplicity, lowest common denominator distractions, they could debate and reason, push for their politics as much as anyone. It wasn't dooming one to be posh or proper, actually. By staying in the punky gutter, ensured an authenticity and sincerity which cut through the upper class's pseudo-attitudes and hollow political gestures. Instead, the Sex Pistols encouraged active participation in the world because what society really wanted was their confinement within it. Don't worry about this or that, keep dumb and real, or not. Challenge the authorities. You matter because you say you do, no less than they do anyway. You have a voice. There's no reason you cannot speak as articulately, intelligently as anyone else. You can beat them at their own professed games of reason, argument, and morality. The Sex Pistols, punk, anarchy as class fusion, coalescence, the honesty of the working classes, the proletariat, with the education of the upper classes, the bourgeoisie. This is the value of punk, ultimately. We aren't aware, perhaps, how doomed and imprisoned we are by class pathos. The upper class live a leisure lifestyle, amused at others who didn't attain or acquire their fortunes. The middle class wants to be as fat and hungry as the upper classes. They want to be considered real members of society as they perceive it. And the lower classes have been encouraged by the upper classes to show off to each other how dumb and vulgar they are. They think sometimes it is an act of provocative challenge to the upper classes, the snobs and pretentious. But no, beat them at their own game. Argue with them, tell them why they are wrong. They have nothing. They know you're right, otherwise they wouldn't be trying to drown their sorrows in wine, mansions, and fancy dinners. Most of us would be okay in a modest cottage, conversing with our families or loved ones. But is that very punk either? We're punks in the first place because this was denied of us, and that lifestyle being economically, materially viable may or may not be a lie. And so, like it or not, no matter what happens, apparently punk still prevails.